Okay, welcome to the 10th episode of the Legacy Den. Okay, we had a small break, but we're back and we're in action. So I'm your host, Rob, and we have our sexier host, Mason. How you doing tonight, Mason?
I'm doing pretty good. I've been dealing with kids and all of them getting sick like they do.
Kids are
So,
gross, full
yes,
of
they are
germs,
little germ bags, aren't they?
with no immunity.
Well, it'll get there eventually. What are you drinking tonight, Rob?
So, I have a Rodberger Pilsner. It's part of an anniversary beer from around the world box set I received as a present for my anniversary. So I will be drinking them on the podcast.
All right. So
Cheers.
wait, do you have cheers. Do you have multiple bottles of them, or is it like a
Multiple
sampler pack?
different bottles from
Oh, okay,
many
so it's
different
like a
places.
sampler.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So let's jump right in. um, so one of the things I want to talk about is I know we've been mentioning Modern Horizons lately a lot, but I really do like it because it's one of those sets that's it is very unique actually. A it's the first time they put a set at this price point where it's not quite a master set, but they made it more expensive than the standard or the Battle Bond conspiracy type sets. So I've been kind of thinking, as I always say, because the price of packs is so expensive, the price of singles I thought was surprisingly low, especially with forces at what when it was released, they were about 25, 30. The basic land fetch was about 20, 25. And I always thought that was kind of low considering a Scalding Tarn is close to $100 now. But one thing that's interesting is the price difference between cards in the United States and in Japan. So I'm going to talk about that for a bit.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, first, I'll go over cards that are more expensive in Japan. So, a few cards that are more expensive in Japan. Right off the bat, the Force is more expensive. Force of Negation. On release date, it was closer to $50 for one card. Whereas I pre-ordered them for about 26, 27 on Card Kingdom. Force of Vigor, the one where you can destroy artifacts and enchantments, is also quite expensive. They were about 12 to 15 on release. The reason I think is because those cards are very, very modern legacy focused. And so there's not a ton of EDH players. So the people who want those cards are going to be people who are playing them in competitive tournaments, which is where most Magic is played in Japan. There's way more competitive tournaments than casual.
I think, I think you're exactly right. I think that the issue is that Japan is very much a competitive format. There are no weekend warriors, playing Magic. It's people who are, want to see themselves on the Pro Tour kind of stuff. And Modern is incredibly popular in Japan. Lots of players play it, and there's only going to be so much Japanese product opened, and then there's almost only going to be so much English product opened here in Japan. And because of all of that, you're going to see a lot less availability. And stores generally know that because players are competitive, they want to get that edge, they want to have the cards that they need to make their deck the best, they're going to pay that extra premium price for those cards. So anything that is basically right off the bat 100% modern playable is gonna see a price hike automatically in Japan.
Yep. So the two forces definitely, and Force of Vigor is interesting because that's also people were talking about using that in Legacy. Like Legacy Lands really wants that to blow up Blood Moons and back to basics and stuff. People were talking about using it against the Karn combo. Like, oh, I can't play cards, but I can destroy things. But womp womp womp, the Latisse turns everything colorless, so you can't even use it there. Oops.
Yep.
So that's kind of one more reason that should be removed from the existence of Magic. A couple other cards that are more expensive in Japan. Things like Archmage's Charm. Archmage's Charm.
The
It's like a
triple
blue.
blue spell.
Yeah, the triple blue spell. Things like that are a little more expensive because it's something that looks like it's kind of a spiky card. And Japan loves their spiky control cards. A couple more. Plague Engineer was about $6 right off the bat, whereas it was still only $2 in the States on the first day. And that's actually one of the things that made me go, maybe Japan is right about this one. Sometimes they're just overpriced for no reason. I think maybe they're right about that card. We'll get into Plague Engineer later because that card is great.
Yeah, that's become one of my personal favorites. Jumping on what you're saying also about like Japan being right sometimes, I did find it very interesting because as the set was released, I don't really have an opportunity to bust packs. I live in a rural area, so my LGS is basically a resale shop that sells almost anything. And there's only a couple of really hardcore card grinders that, you know, play there and bust packs and whatnot. Because of that, I do most of my card shopping online, and I noticed right away that Plague Engineer was like $5. Was it Crashing Footfalls, which is a rare? I believe that one's a rare, isn't it?
The Rhino?
Yeah, the one that makes the rhinos.
Yeah, that one.
That one was like $3 to $5 upon
started
release.
out bulk in the States, and then it went up.
Yeah. There was all sorts of like cards that I looked at and I was just like, well, gee, you know, I see the prices on MTG Goldfish at being like $1 to 50 cents, and I would love to pick them up here, but they're not available for that price here. So I did almost all of my shopping on TCG Player. As I've mentioned before, I'm going back to the United States in July. I just had them all shipped to my mom's apartment, and I'm going to come and pick them up when I go back there later. And I'm kind of glad that I did, because there was like several rares that I got playsets of for like about $1 to $1.50 each that are now in the $5 to $10 range that I just, you know, Japan picked the prices and knew exactly what was going to happen.
Mm-hmm. And it's not the first time. Back when Jace Vern's Prodigy was in Standard, they were already going for $60, $70 in Japan, and they were still going for $30 on Channel Fireball. So I would order from Channel Fireball, bring them to Japan, sell them, and then before I knew it, the American price finally caught up to the Japan price. So it does actually happen a lot where something spikes in Japan first, and they see something that we don't, or they're just adjusting for what the players are paying. And again, it's like, it's one of those things the customer's always right, you know? If Japanese players are going to buy Plague Engineers for $4 each, we'll put them at $5 each, even though they're $1 or $2 in the States, you know?
Yeah. Arbitrage opportunities like from Channel Fireball or from Card Kingdom and then selling them here in Japan aren't very frequent, but they do happen sometimes. And when they do, it sometimes can be a good score.
Yep. Renin 6 was also really expensive in Japan on the first day, and they started buy listing them for close to $70. So I picked up my 2 copies and $60 each from Card Kingdom, because you know, I figured actually they're probably going to go up more. Unsettled Mariner, which is the 2-mana shapeshifter changeling, the one that counters unless you pay 1. They were going for about $12 to $15 in Japan, and I noticed they're still going for $4 online. I could just buy a playset, have it shipped to Japan. It's much cheaper than going and buying them here. I guess people wanted to use it in spirits and humans and stuff. So, and if they want it,
I was just going to say that one I looked at and it seemed very modern playable, but I didn't really see it as being heavily legacy playable, so I didn't bother picking up any of those.
Yep. And that common, the snow artifact common, they're going for $1 or so here.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I bought them for 20 cents on. I should have just bought more. But yeah, so, and of course the basic fetch land, the Prismatic Vista. The Vista is going for more in Japan. They were going for about 45 when I was still picking them up for 25, 26 on Card Kingdom. So that's kind of interesting. And there's also the reverse, things that are more expensive in the States, but far cheaper in Japan sometimes. Like Sarah the Benevolent is $10 here, where it's almost double that online. Urza started out high online, went down a bit, and it started out pretty low in Japan, it's hanging around 25 or so, whereas it's down to 30, 35 in the States. Yawgmoth, I'm picking up English Yawgmoths for $10. I'll pick them up all day at $10. I think that is a card. When 2 packs that are $7 each, and this is a mythic, and it's only $10, I'm like, seems like it's worth more than that. Like, it just feels like it should be worth more. So to me, that was also part of why I was like, I should just get those. Unbound Flourishing, it's kind of an EDH card, which is, again, why it's more expensive in the States than Japan. And $5 here, the one that doubles the X cost. It's one of those ones, the English ones are going to go up in price, and the Japanese ones are going to stay low, like Smothering Tithe. But there's a little bit of time when they're about the same price because nobody in Japan knows that it's an EDH card yet. So now's the time to snatch them up. Giver of Runes spiked in the States before it spiked in Japan. So I picked them up for about $5 or $6, and they're already 12 to 13 online. A couple like small cards, like the Winds of Abandon, they're 50 cents here, where they're $2 online. A really interesting one that's cheaper here is the swords. The swords are much, much cheaper here. Like, as in, they're below $10 for each sword. And I can understand the black and red one isn't great. Because, again, if you're hitting the player and they have an artifact and a planeswalker, well, maybe you're not going to be able to hit them because they have an artifact and planeswalker. Or, if you can do that, then you probably don't even need to kill the artifact and planeswalker. You're already kind of winning. The Truth and Justice one is pretty sweet, though, and I'm quite surprised that one's also going for only, $8 or $9, maybe $10. And of course, it's swords. Swords are great. They're going to go up. That's my opinion, at least.
My LGS has the white blue one for I believe it's like 980 yen, and I've been debating about picking it up. Yeah, it is English.
I mean, that's the price point I would buy at. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been buying other things, so.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's if you want a copy. I like having a copy just to have. And the First Sliver also. It's an EDH card. They're not that expensive here. If you want a Japanese copy, they're really cheap. They're probably close to 12, 13 for a Japanese copy. English ones might be a little more because EDH. That's kind of one of those ones where everybody knows that it's an EDH card. And you can't really hide like, oh yeah, this is totally going to be in Modern. It's not going to be Modern. Everybody wants this crazy, gigantic, good commander. So it's kind of interesting to see what's cheaper and what's more expensive. Hall of Heliod's Generosity is cheaper in Japan because that's also kind of EDH-ish, about $3 compared to the standard. But the Canopy lands are actually about the same. They're all kind of hanging around in the same, $12 to $18 range. So that's kind of also nice that some cards are kind of consistent. But I mean, again, it also varies from store to store. I can go to one store and they might have I don't know, let's pick a random card, Echo of Eons for $25, and another store might have it for $10. Another store might have it for $17. Another store might have a special price one for, 900 yen Japanese or something. That's...
Well, do we want to get into why we think these prices are kind of all over the board? Because it seems like we can talk about how the initial price, for new players and stuff like that is, of course, just going to be, off the charts. But then as time goes on, we'll see prices begin to settle like they always settle. And I'm thinking that there is sort of a problem with the prices settling, and nobody seems to know where they're going to settle. And if I were to make a guess as to why that is, and I think it has everything to do with the Hogak deck.
Mm.
Um, we really didn't plan to talk about it, but I think it bears talking about the idea that because the Hogak deck dropped and is become pretty much the best thing in Modern that you can play.
The boogeyman.
Yeah, and WotC sort of kind of tied themselves up by setting it up so that they have to keep it. They can't emergency ban it. They can't ban it with M20.
You do not want to emergency ban a card you just printed. That looks so bad.
Well, it looks so bad, but also they kind of can't. Part of what some people have been talking about is the what was it? At the MCQ, the winners had to register their deck lists, and they can't change their deck lists for one of the bigger tournaments, I believe it was. And so because of that, they can't make any changes to the banned and restricted list, because then that might invalidate some people's decks that they're doing the what is it? Is it Worlds, or what is it? What is the next big tournament that's coming up?
Mythic qualifiers? What?
I think yeah, maybe.
But and another thing with that, and also nobody wants to see like, oh well, it's going to be banned in 3 days, but we'll just have this last tournament right before the banning. Nobody wants to watch those matches. Nobody wants to see matches of stuff that is already banned. Like, it completely invalidates just making those matches interesting or fun to watch or anything. It happens in fighting games when they patch out something that's really good. It happened in other formats. We recorded a bunch of matches of you playing like Treasure Cruise Delver versus stuff, and then a week later it was banned, and it's like, nobody's gonna watch these videos, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I didn't even want to watch them after Treasure Cruise was banned. It's like, well, we had good matches, but it doesn't matter because it's not the format anymore. So,
however you slice it,
yeah.
like the fact that Hogak got printed and was allowed to go into the set was a big mistake, I think.
Well, yeah, it's a mistake. And the nice part, at least, though, is decks are kind of tuning themselves to being that deck, and inversely, a few other decks. So it looked the way you think, like, oh man, there's these crazy combo decks, like this crazy dredge deck. Oh man, all the fair decks are gonna lose. Yeah, but like, think about blue-white control. Blue-white control is like really fair, right? It's like a fair deck, but it's winning because it kind of knows how to adjust its deck to the meta. Same with Jund. Jund can actually do really well in this kind of meta because it knows there's only one or two really good decks, you know? So they're graveyard decks and kind of control decks. Jund is finding its control decks, doesn't have to worry. Tune its build to be a little anti-graveyard. Suddenly Jund is going to beat all these Hogak decks, you know? And this is a deck that's just not really on the radar now. And that's kind of what happens, is like the fair decks, instead of having to tune for everything, only having to tune for one or two strategies, inversely kind of can make them do a little better, just for until at least at this point when it's that popular. So it's actually a little interesting to see like the tournament results for modern tournaments, because you see a lot of weird decks doing well now because they're just tuned to, you know, not losing to Hogak immediately. Main deck graveyard hate and all this other stuff. So, so let's talk about Legacy.
Okay.
On MTGO, they had a Legacy challenge on June 30th. So, are there any decks you're interested in? First, let's go over the winners. So first place and second place were Storm decks. First place was Burning Wish. Second was Ad Nauseam. Third place was Elves, again featuring Archon of Valor's Reach. Fourth place is one of those things that I like to call like a mess of a deck. Like, the deck is whack. It's 4 Wrenn and 6s, and it's a bunch of kind of like lands plus like 4-color loam. It's 4-color loam, but it doesn't have any loam. You know, it is just a mess of a lands weird deck. and it looks amazing. It's a bunch of one-of creatures. It's got
Wait.
Prefix.
I just got to take a look at this list. Okay, yeah, it does run for Green Sun Zenith. I was just like, okay, so all of these one of green creatures and no green suns. Okay, yeah, but it does.
Courser, Huntmaster, Knight of the Reliquary, Marin, Obelisk Spider. Are you kidding me? Obelisk Spider. Do you even know what that is? If I said Obelisk Spider, could you give me the text on that? I bet
I
you
couldn't even
not.
get you the set. I wouldn't even know what it's from.
It's from Aura of Devastation. It's just when it deals combat damage to a creature, put a -1/-1 counter on that creature. When you put one or more -1/-1 counters on a creature, each opponent loses a life and you gain a life. Oh, and then the Crucible of Worlds, Snake, Goyf, Titania. It's just like it's got Trinispheres and Mox Diamonds. It is so whack. It looks scary to play against, though. I would not want to play against the deck. 5th place is a Delver deck, and again, it's running Grixis colors, but it's got 4 Dreadhorde Arcanists. And you were talking about this last podcast. So what do you think about this deck? It's a Grixis control or Grixis Delver.
So I've actually been thinking about switching over to playing Grixis Delver more, simply because I like the anti-Dreadhorde Arcanist tech of Gurmag Angler. Gurmag Angler actually doesn't die to Bolt or to Fatal Push or any of the other 1-mana removal spells. And I know that because people are trying to pair Dreadhorde Arcanist with like proactive spells to flash back, they're now putting in a whole bunch of Inquisition of Kozilek into their deck lists, and Gurmag Angler also dodges that. So I like the use of Gurmag Angler right now. And I also I like black simply because I want to be able to run 4 Leyline of the Void in my sideboard, and being able to run 4 Leyline is definitely a big positive in the current meta that we're dealing with right now.
And a thing about Leyline. So we were talking about that Hogak deck being broke in Modern. Dragonstar just had a tournament. It's one of our local card stores for Legacy, and it was pretty much Modern, Dredge, Hogak, whatever you want to call it. But the only differences were that it was running a couple dual lands instead of shocks, and it was running Cabal Therapies. And that's it. Everything else was like pretty much the exact same, like the Altar of Dementia, the Stitcher Suppliers, the dudes that come back from the Bloodghasts.
Yeah,
like everything else was exactly the same. It's I'm like, this is Legacy. Like that is actually a real threat. Top 4 the tournament. So Leyline of the Void, it's not a bad idea. And Leyline of the Void is great against opponents' Gurmag Anglers.
This is true. Yeah, I'm kind of thinking that part of what I want to run now in the current meta is 4 Leylines, as well as something that deals with Dreadhorde Arcanist in the form of Gurmag Angler and True Name Nemesis. And I kind of like this list. I was looking at this list and thinking that this might be something that I want to take. This, of course, isn't running Leyline of the Void. This is running 3 Surgical Extractions and 1 Grafdigger's Cage in the sideboard. What would you think about me trying to change those into 4 Leylines?
I think it's fine. Sideboard cards are the easiest to change. What I do when I'm net decking is I'll pretty much take the 75 and copy it, and the sideboard is where I start to change. I'm like, the main deck is probably a little more fine-tuned, but the sideboard is really where I can kind of do what I want, and especially because if their meta is online and my meta is at a store in Japan, they're very different. The decks that Japanese people like, that's kind of what I also have to think about. Japanese people tend to play spiky decks. So I'm probably going to run into a lot of graveyard decks or decks where Leyline is better than Surgical and Grafdigger's Cage. So that's why I would be like, well, I'm just going to run the 4 Leylines then. Seems like a good plan, I think.
Well, I'm trying to come up with a deck for my upcoming tournament in Denver, and I'm pretty dang sure that there's going to be a lot of combo decks, and they're probably going to be a big variety. I know of one guy who's bringing strawberry shortcake specifically.
Painter.
Yeah,
For those who don't know, Painter is a deck.
that is a deck. So there's that, but then there's also like just various other like graveyard strategy decks and whatnot. And I've been looking for a Grixis control list that runs Gurmag Angler, that runs Dreadhorde Arcanist, because I really think that card is a house right now. Just being able to like flashback 1-mana spells over and over again is really good. But another thing that I also want to be able to run is the Plague Engineer. I really see Plague Engineer as not getting enough play in Legacy, to be quite honest. And I have fallen in love with that card. And I remember the moment I actually did fall in love with it is when I realized that -1/-1 effect is one-sided. It only affects creatures your opponents control. That completely blew my mind when I read that. I was just like, wait a minute, this is one-sided.
I cannot wait for the day that I have a Nemesis out. My opponent has a Trinity Nemesis. I play Plague Engineer, and they're like, yeah, that's fine. And I'm like, Merfolk. And they're like, yours is dead too. And I'm like, no, it isn't.
No, it isn't. Read the card,
for that
dude.
day. I cannot wait until that day happens. I might just play Plague Engineer TNN decks until that happens, because that sounds great. And again, it stops Young Pyros. You can name Human, and just Young Pyro itself will never show up. And Delver can't be put on the battlefield. You can name Merfolk to stop all the TNNs. You can name Elves to stop Elves. Or even if you're playing in something weird, I don't know, if you're playing in Storm and you just want a creature just to beat face with, and they might have a Xancet Swarm, just name whatever insect, and then or name goblins. Then that just completely turns off Empty the Warrens. Surgical out tendrils or something, and then Plague Engineer on goblins, just hold on to that and you're good.
If I ran this deck list, the thing I'm looking at is in the sideboard there's a Grim Lavamancer. It's a 1-of. And I think that would be a good switch out for Plague Engineer, just because I think that Grim Lavamancer is specifically there for the mirrors. It's there for the Delver mirrors of just basically shooting down your opponent's Delvers and just, over and over again, like getting rid of their stuff. I honestly kind of like the idea of just having a Plague Engineer and just wiping a board, just naming Elemental and getting rid of all of their tokens.
Great against Death and Taxes. Name Human.
Yep.
They're like, oh, I have Mother of Rude, Xanthalia. You cannot do anything. I have Karakas. And I'm just like, Plague Engineer. And they're like, bounce Thalia, and she'll never see play.
Yep. She'll never come back.
So I quite like Plague Engineer. Because, even Engineered Plague itself was great. Plague Engineer can shut down goofy things like Allurin even.
Well, to me, what was great about it was I liked how it had a Wrath effect, but it also traded for a card. So like you would drop it and you would immediately like name something that would just get removed. You name Human, or you name whatever, and you set it up. And I thought that, okay, even if it's, because I had assumed that the effect was global, I thought that my stuff would get sacked as well. Even if I'm have to name something that I don't want to have to name, if I have to name Human and I like kill all of their other stuff, like if I can kill 2 of their things and only 1 of my thing, I'm up a card. And then it has Death Touch, which means it'll trade with something else. So they can't swing into it with, like, say, a Dreadhorde Arcanist or something else, because now it's going to be trading.
It's also a blocker.
But then when I realized it was one-sided, it's pretty much a 2-for-1.
You don't have to worry about. Yeah.
You name something to wrath their board or just kill a single thing, but then you also have a 2/2 Death Toucher that trades with anything that comes across the board. So after it's already traded for 1 card, you can immediately then trade it for another card just because of its Death Touch.
Yeah, and like have you ever played against an opponent and they have TNN and you're like, okay, and they play a second one and they kind of go back like, and you're just like, can't you? I cannot wait to just be like Plague Engineer, Merfolk.
Get going. So I like this deck. It only got 5th place. I may be having to deal with a whole bunch of Storm players or something like that. I really don't know how the meta is going to shake up. I really wanted to find a Grixis control list that ran Plague Engineer, mainly because because the things I'm looking for, of course, are the ley lines in the board, the Plague Engineers, just to get rid of hard to deal with creatures and whatnot, and Dreadhorde Arcanist just as a way of accruing value. And so far, I haven't seen any Grixis control lists that I like that have those elements to them.
Yeah, Grixis control is there are times when I'm like, this deck is good, and then there are times when I'm like, this deck is not so good. So I think Dreadhorde Arcanist might be one of the things that can push it over the top and kind of gives it that extra push that it needs. Because Grixis is the kind of deck where you kind of go even, just try to go a little bit above what they're doing, try to not get too, you don't need to get too ahead, you just need to be ahead enough to kill them before they kill you. But Dreadhorde can really just snowball into destroying all of their strategies. Because when you're doing 2 spells a turn and stopping what they're doing, it's like
it accrues value. It's basically an engine. And even if you're just flashing back, brainstorms and ponders like in mid-combat step, you are gaining card advantage over your opponent. And the longer your opponent allows that thing to just keep swinging at you, the more card advantage you're gaining. Now, I think people have wised up, which is why we're seeing a lot more Tarmogoyfs. We're seeing a lot more Nimble Mongoose is coming back in vogue now with the Rug Delver lists that we're seeing.
Well, that's because of Ren and 6.
Yeah.
Which I'll talk about in a bit.
I honestly would like you to go into that because I of course, I could try to scrape together enough money to get Ren and 6s and try and make like a rug list, but I just really don't want to play that in my tournament coming up. I would much rather play a Grixis control list.
Always play what you're comfortable with in big tournaments. Small tournaments, the weeklies, those are for playing like the fun, goofy stuff. But always stick to your guns in big tournaments. Even if it doesn't go well that big tournament, it's just important to know that at least, you know what, I may not have gone well, but you don't want to go into the tournament thinking I picked the wrong deck. But yeah, so I'm going to talk about Ren and 6.
Please do.
So in quite a few of these decks, Rug Delver has made a comeback. There's a long period when Rug Delver was just not doing very well.
It was unplayable. I'm just going to go out and say it. It was unplayable.
I'm not sure exactly what made it unplayable. I know there was something that made it unplayable. Back to Basics and Blood Moon decks were pretty huge. Nimble Mongoose just not being very good. Delver decks Grixis just being better because of Deathrite. Like Deathrite Shaman just shoved Rug Delver out of the format for quite a bit. Yeah, Rug Delver was just one of those decks that was like, it was really good at one point, and then it kind of went to being unplayable. Like I never saw anyone using it. I never saw Nimble Mongooses anymore. Tarmogoyf seemed to not have any effect. Maybe it was after Fatal Push was printed. Fatal Push might have been the final nail in the coffin for that period of time. Because suddenly, even Black now has a way to deal with Tarmogoyf. Before, it was like, well, okay, you have Lightning Bolts and stuff, but can you deal with a 4 or 5 Tarmogoyf? And it's just like, yeah, with a Fatal Push and a Gurmag Angler.
Yeah.
So, but
I think one of the key things that kind of disrupted Rug's life was there was pretty much no reason to play green anymore. Black had everything that green had, and because Black had so much more. It had more versatility.
That's true. Yeah.
Because green, pretty much all you were playing green for was Tarmogoyf and Nimble
Nimble
Mongoose.
Mongoose. And like two ancient grudges in the side border, submerge or some weird stuff.
Yeah, and those cards are powerful, but like you had when Black received Gurmag Angler, it suddenly had the ability to go toe to toe with a Goyf, and when it had Fatal Push, it suddenly had the removal it needed to just take out Goyf, on command.
And not only that, Grixis could take out Rug Delver's cards, and Rug Delver couldn't remove a zombie fish. Rug Delver couldn't deal with TNN.
Yep.
And when
which Black could.
Yeah. And when you're a deck that runs no basics and all these back to basic decks are showing up, suddenly you're just like, this doesn't feel good.
Yeah.
But I feel like Wrenn and 6 kind of changed everything. So a lot of these Rug Delver decks are running 3 copies of them. And the reason why Wrenn and 6 is great is because it's 2 mana, so you can play it on turn 2. And essentially, yes, there are going to be times when you do just set out a Trop, set out a Volk, Wrenn and 6. Very, very few, though. Most of the time, you're going to be fetching for one of them, or you're going to Wasteland turn 1 or something, and then you're going to play Wrenn and 6. But the idea with Wrenn and 6 is just you play them, you get a land back, either a fetch or a Wasteland, and you go nuts. And then even if you're drawing lands and you're getting Wastelands back and your opponent has no more lands to waste, that's fine. Just brainstorm them away, shuffle, and suddenly like you've just got a whole hand of gas. You have a whole hand of really, really good things without having to put good cards back. You're just putting back lands you don't need because you'll find more. And the red-blue Canopy land also is a one of. So Rug Delver, again, they'll kill you faster than they're killed. And you can pay 1 sack it, draw a card. So if you just need cards, you can Wrenn and 6, bam, sack, draw. Oh, finally, I found a Goyf, boom. So it's really good. And then again, you get Wrenn and 6 to 7 or 8 or whatever. If you have another one in your hand and get to 7, you ult Wrenn and 8, and suddenly all of your cards are lightning bolts. Every card in your hand is a lightning bolt.
What is his ultimate too? I forget it.
You get emblem, instant, and sorcery cards in your graveyard have retrace.
I see. So you basically discard a card and pay red, and suddenly you're bolting them to the dome.
Or, again. I mean, like, yeah, you have their ponders or brainstorms or spell pierces or whatever, but essentially it's going to be find your bolt, discard a land, bolt, discard a land, bolt, Wrenn and 6 plus, get a land back, discard a land, bolt.
Yep.
And this is on top of having Delvers, Nimble Mongooses. The deck in 9th place is a little spicy. They have 4 Hex Drinkers. So Hex Drinker is the new 1 green mana for a 2/1 with level up for 1 mana. From levels 3 to 7, it becomes a 4/4 with protection from instant. And at level 8 and up, it's a 6/6 with protection from everything. Which is the text that I would have made if I was like 9 years old and was going to design my own Magic card. I'm like, yeah, well, your card, it has like 20/20. Yeah, well, mine is 50/50 protection from everything, So that's why I love that text, protection from everything. It sounds so like 10-year-old designs a card, and at the end, just protection from everything because they're so powerful,
Yeah, it's got to be an arms race. Well, my card has protection from blue and white. Well, my card has protection from black and red and white. Well, my card has protection from all of your lands too, so you can't even tap it. Well, mine has protection from everything.
That's exactly what I think of when I hear the text protection from everything. It's great. But I think Hex Drinker is cool. I like it because it's new. I like new cards. New cards are cool. Using new cards and having them being really good, like Wrenn and 6, is cool. So this deck that's running 3 red and 6 and 4 Hex Drinkers, along with the Delvers, the Goose, and the Goyfs. Pretty neat. But I do think Wrenn and 6 is a real card. Just everyone runs fetch lands. There's like no decks that don't. So when you're turn 2 green, red, and then you get a fetch back, it already replaces itself. And then they have to deal with it. And if you needed to, people don't usually use the -1 very often, but if you need to, you can just -1 and kill something. Oh, you cast a Delver. Okay, well, that's not going to flip. Die.
Dead.
Right? Oh, you cast a Young Pyro and like and you got like 1 or 2 tokens. Okay, well, kill the Young Pyro just so I don't have to deal with that. No. A Hex Drinker. Level up. Protection from everything.
Yeah, I like the design space that they created for the card. 2 mana and then having it just be there to smooth out your draws and just get you lands back that you kind of need. There's never a time in which you don't want to have like an extra fetch land. Like Brainstorm decks want an extra fetch land just to be able to, shuffle away stuff.
Exactly.
Wastelands are always everywhere, and you're always going to have something in the yard that you want to bring back. I find it funny.
Yeah.
Like, because is Wrenn and 6 even seeing play in Modern?
Well, I mean, Modern is blue-white controlled, Jund, and well, not Jund. The graveyard decks, and then maybe a few other decks. There was a Modern big GP recently where blue-white control won. They beat Dredge. Burn is really good. Phoenix is really good. Humans is really good.
Well, it just seems that like with this Planeswalker, like it's almost like they designed it for Legacy. They like made this and they're just like, we have no real intention of anybody using it Modern, but
really, Wrenn and 6 is not showing up in Modern. Just tell you that much. I almost want to throw it in Vintage.
I honestly, I would love to go out and buy a couple of copies, but I just the one deck that I really want to try Wrenn and 6 in, the only deck that I want to try it in is this brew that I've had in the back of my brain. Back, I don't know, like a year or so ago, there was a Temur control list that ran Bedlam Revelers and Dack Faydens, and literally it was like 22, 23 lands. It had Punishing Fires and Groves, and it had Bedlam Revelers, and I think it had like every single cantrip. It had Ponders, Brainstorms, and Preordains. And the whole idea is that you just milled through your deck as fast as possible in order to give Bedlam Reveler the maximum amount of impact of that draw 3. And it had a terrible matchup against Dark Depths combo. And Dark Depths combo it just could not handle. And I believe Dark Depths showed up and became like tier 1.5, tier 2, something like that.
Yeah.
And it was everywhere. And the deck just basically folded to it. And I thought, oh crap, that was a really cool idea while it lasted. Now it's gone. I really want to do a Temur control list with that same shell and then have Wrenn and 6, because Wrenn and 6 and Dack Fayden just
play well
best
together.
Buds.
Yeah.
They're just best buds. If you don't have any of your Punishing Fires, you just pitch your lands and then Wrenn and 6 them right back, and
I also like Seasoned Pyromancer is actually, I think, just better than Bedlam.
Really?
Yeah, hear me out.
I will hear you out.
Bedlam, well, first off, multiple copies get stuck in your hand, and it sucks, right?
Multiple copies of Bedlam?
Yeah, they get stuck in your hand.
The deck only played like 2 of them, I believe, because it was always a late game play. You could never play.
Well, then you can't rely on it too much. Then if it's only a 2 of. Anyways, and sometimes like you just don't have a ton of instants or sorceries in your yard, and Bedlam is like 8 mana, and you have like 5 mana, and you're like,
well, yeah, part of the deal with it.
And sometimes you're like, I don't want to discard. I'm sitting here with the Force of Will, a Daze, and 2 lands, and a Bedlam. Like, yeah, I can play the lands, But like you don't want to discard good cards for random cards. With the Pyromancer, you only discard 2. And then if you do discard non-lands, you get a token for those. And I'm always a fan of going wide over going big. And also, again, if you have no cards in hand, which is, again, Bedlam, you still draw 2, which is still really good. And it does something if it dies. If Seasoned Pyromancer dies, at least you can 5 mana throw some tokens into play for like a last, like, oh my god, I need to get, a last few bit of damage in. It's really just so much better than Bedlam. I mean, I've only seen it in play in Modern, and I haven't seen Bedlam in Legacy in quite a long time. But I don't know. I think Pyromancer is better.
Well, I mean, part of what I liked about Bedlam was the fact that you if it was stuck in your hand, you're talking about like having 2 in your hand at the same time. That was the power of Dack Fayden. You just churned through your deck, draw 2, discard 2. No, I've got 2 of these. Well, screw it. I don't need 1. You could pitch whatever you didn't want, and it would be fine. By the time you finished a game, you almost always had like 10 cards left in your library. You were always you were always finding everything because there was nothing left in your library by the time the game was done.
And one thing I like about the Seasoned Pyromancer then is like you can always just be like punishing fire to my hand, punishing fire to my hand. Pyromancer, get rid of the punishing fires, draw 2, still holding on to Force of Will. Like that's one thing I didn't like about Bedlam when I tried it was it doesn't go well with blue because you want to hold on to your counters, but I also want to play this creature because it draws me cards, So it's like it can make the lack of versatility on having to discard your whole hand is rough. Also, Narset is pretty prevalent now. And so discarding your hand and drawing 0, feels pretty bad.
Sure.
And also you would run Narset in that deck too, because you're running Dack Fayden.
Yes, you would. Definitely seems worth a slot.
Yeah. So I'm hoping you can put it together one day when Ren and 6s are available
once Ren
to you.
6 goes down to like $30.
Oh yeah. Again, will never happen.
Probably not.
All right. Anyways, good podcast. Good talking. So let's try out our Plague Engineers. Let's board them in.
Yep.
Let's make our opponents cry.
All right. Thanks everyone for tuning in to this week's Legacy Den, and we appreciate everybody coming and watching our podcast. If you have any questions for us or anything like that, please don't be afraid to post in the comments section, give us a like, and shout out to anybody who would like to.
You can be the first person to post in the comment section in any of our videos. That you can make history happen.
Indeed.
All right. Sayonara, Mason.
Sayonara, Rob.